What happens when a single act of contempt, a deliberate splash of Coca-Cola on a quiet passenger, isn't just an insult? What if it's a spark that ignites a firestorm of consequences? Buckle up, because this is no ordinary story of airline drama. We're diving into a tale of prejudice, power, and jaw-dropping karma that'll leave you speechless. This is Dark Stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single second of this. We're not talking about a simple complaint or a voucher for a free flight. We're talking about a moment so vile, so dripping with prejudice, that it brings an entire airline to its knees. This is the story of a flight attendant who believed her uniform gave her power, a black woman who refused to be broken, and her billionaire husband who, in one breathtaking moment, walked out of the shadows and delivered the most spectacular on-the-spot karma you've ever seen. Stay with me on Dark Stories, because the fallout from this incident goes far beyond one woman's career. It's a story of hidden power, corporate rot, and a reckoning that was heard around the world. Want to know how one spilled drink changed an entire industry? Keep listening. The cabin of Aerolux Premier Flight 104, a custom-configured Airbus A380 bound for London Heathrow from JFK, was a study in muted luxury. The lighting was soft, the scent of lavender and leather hung in the air, and the gentle hum of the Rolls-Royce engines was a lullaby for the privileged. In Seat 3A, Ebony Wilson was the picture of tranquility. Dressed in a cream-colored silk blouse and tailored trousers, she was reviewing notes on her sleek laptop for the keynote address she was due to give at the Tate Modern. Her field was post-colonial African art, a passion that had taken her from dusty archives in Dar to gleaming galleries in Paris. She was a woman who moved through the world with a quiet confidence, her presence defined by grace, not volume. This grace, however, seemed to be entirely lost on the senior flight attendant working the first-class cabin. Her name tag read Tiffany, and she moved with a brisk, almost aggressive efficiency. Tiffany had been flying for nearly 2 decades. She'd seen the industry change, her own youthful glamour fade into a hardened professionalism that now bordered on brittle resentment. She saw her seniority not as a responsibility, but as a weapon. From the moment Ebony boarded, she felt the chill. Tiffany's smile, offered so readily to the white businessman in 2C and the blonde actress in 4D, vanished when her eyes met Ebony's. Her welcome aboard was clipped. When Ebony requested to have her coat hung, Tiffany took it with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated, her lips pursed in a thin line of disapproval. Ebony was no stranger to microaggressions. She had navigated them her entire life in academia, in galleries, in spaces where her very existence was an unexpected variable. Her usual method was to meet them with unshakable poise, a silent refusal to let another's prejudice dictate her own emotional state. She settled into her seat, sipped the pre-departure glass of water, the champagne she'd initially requested was forgotten, and focused on her work. The first hour of the flight passed uneventfully. The meal service began. Tiffany took the orders of the passengers around Ebony with theatrical warmth. "Mr. Henderson, the sea base is particularly wonderful this evening. Can I recommend the Sancerre to pair with it? It's divine. Miss Vale, of course, the filet medium rare. An excellent choice." When she arrived at Ebony's seat, the warmth evaporated. She stood, pad in hand, her expression flat. "And for you? I'll have the sea base as well." "Thank you," Ebony said, her voice even and pleasant. "The Sancerre is the recommended pairing," Tiffany stated, not as a suggestion, but as a fact being read from a manual. "That sounds lovely, thank you," Ebony replied. The meal was served. The sea base was exquisite, the wine perfectly chilled. But as Tiffany cleared the plates, she accidentally knocked Ebony's fork from the tray onto the pristine silk of her blouse, leaving a small, greasy smear of beurre blanc. "Oh, clumsy me," Tiffany said, her tone devoid of any genuine apology. She made a cursory dab at the spot with a coarse paper napkin, making it worse. "It'll come out." Ebony looked down at the stain, then back up at Tiffany, her gaze steady. "A club soda and a proper cloth, please." Tiffany's eyes flashed with irritation. It was a reasonable request, but it was a command, a disruption to her routine from a passenger she had already mentally dismissed. She returned moments later, practically throwing a damp cloth and a small glass of club soda onto Ebony's side table before turning her back and walking away. Watching from 2 rows back was a man named David Davies, a partner at a prominent London law firm. He was a frequent flyer on this route and had noticed the flight attendant's behavior from the start. He was a man trained to observe details, and the disparity in treatment was not subtle. He made a mental note of it. An hour later, as the cabin lights dimmed for the movie service, Ebony found herself thirsty. She had finished her water, and her throat was dry from the recycled air. She pressed the call button. 5 minutes passed. Nothing. The blue light above her seat remained illuminated, an unanswered plea in the quiet cabin. She could see Tiffany chatting animatedly with another flight attendant, Chloe, in the galley. Chloe, much younger and with a kinder face, glanced toward the cabin and seemed to notice the light. But a sharp word from Tiffany made her turn back. Ebony waited another 5 minutes before pressing the button again. This time, the response was quicker. Tiffany emerged from the galley, her face a mask of annoyance. Yes, she snapped, loud enough for the surrounding passengers to stir. The mask of poise on Ebony's face did not slip, but inside, a cold anger was beginning to coalesce. I would like a glass of Coca-Cola, please, with ice. It was a simple request, but in the charged atmosphere Tiffany had created, it felt like a challenge for Tiffany. It was the final straw. A woman she had deemed insignificant was demanding her attention, refusing to be ignored. Of course, she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. She turned and marched back to the galley. Mr. Davies watched, a sense of unease settling over him. He saw Tiffany grab a can of Coke and a glass. He saw her slam the ice tongs into the bucket. He saw the look on her face as she walked back down the aisle, a tight, vengeful fury. Ebony was looking at her laptop, trying to ignore the palpable hostility radiating from the approaching flight attendant. She heard Tiffany arrive at her seat. "Here is your Coca-Cola," Tiffany said, her voice tight. And then it happened. It wasn't a simple spill. Tiffany didn't just knock the glass in a movement that was both shockingly fast and yet seemed to unfold in slow motion. She appeared to trip on a non-existent wrinkle in the carpet. Her body lurched forward, and the entire can of dark, sticky soda, along with the half-full glass, emptied itself directly onto Ebony. It was a deluge. The cold liquid shocked her skin. It soaked her silk blouse, turning it from a pristine cream to a grotesque, spreading brown. It cascaded over her hands and onto her laptop keyboard, fizzing and popping as it seeped into the delicate electronics. The screen flickered violently and then went black. A collective gasp went through the first-class cabin. Ebony sat there, drenched and stunned into silence. The humiliation was a physical blow, hot and sharp. The smell of the sweet soda was nauseating. Her presentation, weeks of work, was on that dead laptop. Tiffany stood over her, feigning shock. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. I must have tripped. Are you all right?" But as Ebony looked up past the fake concern in Tiffany's voice, she saw it, a flicker in the flight attendant's eyes, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk of satisfaction at the corner of her mouth before it was quickly suppressed. It wasn't an accident. It was an assault. The silence in the cabin was broken by Ebony's voice. It wasn't a shout. It was low, trembling with a controlled rage that was far more terrifying than any scream. "You did that on purpose." The accusation hung in the air, sharp and clear. "You did that on purpose." Tiffany's feigned shock curdled into defensive fury. "How dare you? I tripped. It was an accident. I could lose my job over a spill like this, and you're accusing me of doing it deliberately." She played the victim with practiced ease, her voice rising in pitch, attracting even more attention. "Your laptop," she said, gesturing vaguely at the dark, silent machine. "We have forms for damaged property. You'll have to fill one out upon landing." Her tone was dismissive, as if discussing a misplaced pen. She offered a handful of flimsy cocktail napkins. "Here, for the mess." Ebony looked at the useless squares of paper, then at the spreading stain that had ruined her expensive blouse and potentially destroyed her work. The condescension was more insulting than the spill itself. Her carefully maintained composure finally fractured, not with hysteria, but with a diamond-hard resolve. "This is not about a mess, and it's not about a form, Ebony said, her voice gaining strength. This is about your deplorable behavior since the moment I stepped on this aircraft. I want to speak to the captain now. The captain is busy, Tiffany snapped, crossing her arms. He doesn't deal with passenger spills. I am the senior attendant in this cabin, and I am handling it. You are not handling it. A man's voice cut in. It was David Davies, the lawyer from seat 5B. He was standing now, his expression grim. I've been watching you for the past 2 hours. Your treatment of Ms. Wilson has been unprofessional and pointedly different from your treatment of every other passenger in this cabin. And that trip was utterly unbelievable. I will be happy to provide a statement to the captain and to your corporate office to that effect. Tiffany's face went pale. The challenge from Ebony was one thing. A corroborating witness, a white man in a tailored suit, was another. Her bravado began to falter. Sir, with all due respect, this is a crew matter. It became my matter when I witnessed a potential assault, Mr. Davies corrected calmly. The younger flight attendant, Chloe, had emerged from the galley, her face wide with alarm. She was holding a stack of thick, absorbent towels. Her eyes met Ebony's with a look of profound, helpless apology. Tiffany, maybe we should get the purser, Chloe whispered, tugging on her senior's sleeve. I will handle this, Tiffany hissed, shaking her off. She turned her glare back to Ebony. Ma'am, if you continue to make these baseless accusations, I will have the captain radio ahead and have you detained for interfering with the flight crew. It was a stunning overreach, a threat designed to intimidate and silence. But before Ebony could even respond, a new voice entered the standoff, a voice that carried an effortless, immediate authority that cut through the tension like a hot knife through butter. That will not be necessary. The voice came from the front of the cabin. A door Ebony hadn't even noticed, one that blended seamlessly into the wall of the bulkhead, had opened. This was the entrance to the residence, Aerolux's most exclusive offering, a 3-room private suite with a living area, a bedroom, and a private bathroom, a flying apartment for the ultra-wealthy. Stepping out was a tall, impeccably dressed man, Marcus Thorne. His presence seemed to suck the air out of the cabin. He wasn't loud or flashy, but the quiet power he radiated was undeniable. He had been working in his office and had come out after hearing the commotion. His eyes first took in the scene, the drenched passenger, the dead laptop, the defiant flight attendant, the concerned witness. Then his gaze locked onto Ebony, and his expression shifted from detached command to one of deep, personal concern. Ebony, what in God's name happened? He asked, striding forward. Ebony looked at her husband, and for the first time, the immense stress and humiliation of the moment registered on her face. Marcus, she said, her voice wavering slightly. She threw a Coke on me. Tiffany stared, dumbfounded, as Marcus knelt beside his wife's seat, gently touching her soaked sleeve, his eyes scanning the damage. Who is this? A friend of yours? Tiffany demanded, her sense of control completely gone. She saw a black man coming to the defense of a black woman, and her prejudice filled in the blanks. Sir, this is a private matter. I need you to return to your seat. Marcus rose to his full height and turned to face her. He looked at her, his gaze level and unervingly calm. It was a look that had made corporate raiders and hostile board members tremble. You are Tiffany Miller, correct? Seniority of 19 years, based out of JFK, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Tiffany was thrown. How do you know that? I make it my business to know the people who work for me, Marcus said, his voice dangerously soft. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a slim leather wallet, and extracted a business card. He held it out to her. Tiffany took it tentatively. Her eyes scanned the card, the heavy, linen-finished stock, the simple, elegant text, Marcus Thorne, Chairman and CEO, Thorne Aviation Group. Below the name, in smaller print, was a list of subsidiary companies. The first one on the list was Aerolux Premier. The color drained from Tiffany's face. She looked from the card to Marcus' unyielding eyes and back again. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The reality was too massive, too catastrophic to comprehend. The man she had dismissed, the husband of the woman she had deliberately humiliated, wasn't just another passenger. He owned the entire airline. Mr. Thorne, she stammered, the card trembling in her hand. I had no idea. It was an accident. I swear, I tripped. The carpet, Marcus didn't even glance at the floor. His attention was absolute. Miss Miller, please summon the flight purser and the captain to my suite immediately. He then turned to the other passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Marcus Thorne. I apologize sincerely for this disruption to your flight. Please be assured we will handle this situation. He then looked at Mr. Davies. Sir, I would be grateful if you would join us as well. I believe you have something to add. Mr. Davies nodded grimly. It would be my pleasure. Finally, Marcus turned back to Ebony, his voice softening completely. He helped her to her feet. Come on, honey. Let's get you out of these wet clothes. My suite has a shower. He gently guided his drenched, shaken, but now vindicated wife toward the private door, leaving a terrified Tiffany Miller standing in the aisle, the architect of her own spectacular ruin. The karma had arrived, and it was wearing a bespoke suit. The residence was another world. The air was still and quiet, insulated from the main cabin. Inside, it looked like a miniature Park Avenue apartment with plush sofas, polished wood, and a large screen displaying the flight path over a map of the Atlantic. Marcus led Ebony straight through the living area to the en-suite bathroom, which was larger than many New York City studio apartments, complete with a marble-lined shower. There are fresh towels and a robe in the closet, he said softly, his anger simmering beneath a layer of deep concern for her. Take your time. I'll handle this. Ebony just nodded, her mind still reeling. She closed the bathroom door, and the sound of the shower was a welcome relief, a chance to wash away the sticky soda and the stinging humiliation. Out in the living area, Marcus had shed his calm demeanor. His face was like granite. He loosened his tie, his movements sharp and precise. A few minutes later, 3 people stood awkwardly at the suite's entrance, a nervous-looking Captain Evans, a stern-faced flight purser named Maria, and the man who had witnessed everything, David Davies. Tiffany was conspicuously absent, having been ordered to wait in the galley under the supervision of another crew member. Come in, close the door, Marcus commanded, his voice low and resonant. They entered, their expressions a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Marcus didn't invite them to sit. He remained standing, a predator in his own territory. Captain Evans, he began, I'm sure you're wondering why you've been summoned from the flight deck. Tonight, in the first-class cabin of an aircraft that bears my company's name, my wife was assaulted by a member of your crew. The captain's eyes widened. Assaulted, Mr. Thorne? I was told there was a spill, an accident. The spill was the assault weapon, Marcus cut in, his voice cold as ice. A full can of Coca-Cola deliberately emptied onto her and her property. This was the culmination of 2 hours of hostile, discriminatory, and unprofessional behavior. Mr. Davies here was kind enough to bear witness. Mr. Davies, please. All eyes turned to the lawyer. David Davies, calm and methodical, recounted everything he had seen from the initial clipped welcome to the forgotten champagne, the fork incident, the ignored call button, and the final theatrical trip. He spoke with the precision of a man used to giving testimony, his account leaving no room for doubt. There was no wrinkle in the carpet, Mr. Davies concluded firmly. I was watching her feet. The act was deliberate. In my professional opinion, it constitutes battery. Captain Evans and Maria, the purser, looked horrified. They had worked with Tiffany for years. They knew she could be difficult and prickly, with a sharp tongue and a sense of entitlement, but this was a level of malice they had never suspected. Mr. Thorne, I am appalled, the captain said, his face ashen. This is completely unacceptable. We will, of course, file a full report. Miss Miller will be suspended pending a full investigation. No, Marcus interrupted. The word was flat. Final. No, she will not be suspended. Her employment with Aerolux Premier is terminated, effective immediately. The 2 crew leaders stared at him, stunned. Mr. Thorne, Maria, the purser, began hesitantly, with all due respect, there are union procedures, HR protocols. We can't just fire someone mid-flight. Marcus took a step closer, his eyes boring into her. Maria, is it? Let me be clear. Thorne Aviation Group is a non-unionized entity. It's one of the first things I did when we acquired this airline. I replaced bureaucratic entanglement with a simple zero-tolerance policy for racism, abuse, and behavior that destroys the very fabric of the luxury service we promise our clients. Your protocols exist to protect good employees from misunderstandings. They do not exist to shield abusers from the consequences of their actions. He gestured toward the main cabin. That woman didn't just spill a drink. She targeted a passenger. She did it because my wife is a black woman, and she felt she could get away with it. She destroyed personal property. She humiliated a customer in front of an entire cabin. And then she lied about it and threatened her victim. This isn't a matter for HR. This is a malignancy we are cutting out before it spreads. He turned to the captain. Captain Evans, upon landing at Heathrow, you will have airport security meet the aircraft. They are to escort Miss Miller from the premises. She is not to have contact with any other crew members. She is not to re-enter the airport terminal except to be processed for her departure. Her credentials are to be revoked on the spot. Is that understood? The captain, realizing the absolute authority he was facing, simply nodded. Understood, Mr. Thorne. Good, Marcus said. He then turned to Mr. Davies. Mr. Davies, my legal team will be in touch. We will be pursuing this matter, and your testimony will be invaluable. Please send the bill for your time to my office. There will be no bill, Mr. Davies said. Some things are more important. As the captain and purser turned to leave, the bathroom door opened. Ebony emerged, wrapped in a plush white robe, her hair damp. She had scrubbed her skin raw, but a sense of quiet dignity had returned to her. She looked at the assembled group, her eyes finally landing on Marcus. He immediately went to her side. Are you okay? She nodded. The laptop is gone, Marcus. My entire keynote, years of research, images. Marcus' jaw tightened. He looked at the purser. Maria, I want a full inventory of everything Miss Miller has ever been cited for. Every passenger complaint, every internal reprimand, no matter how minor. I want it on my desk before we land. And find Chloe, the junior flight attendant. I want to speak with her alone. Maria nodded, a new steely resolve in her own eyes. Yes, sir. After they had all left, Marcus led Ebony to the sofa. He sat beside her, taking her hand. I am so sorry, Ebony. I should have been out there with you. You can't be with me every second of the day to protect me from the world, Marcus, she said, her voice soft but weary. But I'm glad you were here for this. She looked around the opulent suite. This is quite the ace to have up your sleeve. A faint smile touched his lips, but his eyes remained hard. It's not about the luxury, Ebony. It was never about that. It's about having the power to make things right. To ensure that people like Tiffany Miller don't get to write the story. He stood up and walked to the small, fully stocked bar in the corner of the suite. He poured 2 glasses of a very old, very expensive single malt scotch. He handed one to her. Tonight, he said, his voice a low vowel, we're not just firing one woman. We're starting a war. We're going to find out how she was allowed to fester in this company for so long. We're going to find every complaint that was ever swept under the rug. And we are going to disinfect this entire organization from the top down. Her karma isn't just getting fired. It's being the catalyst for a revolution she never saw coming. Ebony took a sip of the scotch, the fiery liquid a welcome contrast to the cold shock she had felt earlier. She looked at her husband, a man whose love was as fierce and uncompromising as his business acumen. The reckoning had begun. The landing at Heathrow was seamless for the passengers, but a quiet storm for the crew. As the A380 taxied to its gate, two uniformed airport security officers and a grim-faced Aerolux station manager were waiting on the jet bridge. Tiffany Miller knew what was coming. After being confined to the galley for the remainder of the flight, the news of her immediate termination had been formally delivered by a stone-faced Maria. The reality was still sinking in, a cold, nauseating dread that had replaced her earlier fury. 19 years, her whole adult life, her identity, her pension, all evaporating over the Atlantic. She had tried to argue, to plead, citing her years of loyal service. Maria had simply looked at her and said, "Loyalty is a two-way street, Tiffany. You showed none to our passenger or to the values of this company." As the seatbelt sign turned off, Tiffany was escorted to the door before any passengers could disembark. Her colleagues, people she had worked with for years, avoided her gaze. Their silence was a verdict in itself. She was handed her personal items in a clear plastic bag, the final humiliation. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the security officers flanked her, and the station manager held out a hand for her ID badge and crew credentials. The click of the shears as he cut her badge in half echoed louder than any engine. She was an outcast, a ghost in the machine she once commanded. Meanwhile, Marcus and Ebony were the last to leave the plane, personally seen off by Captain Evans, who apologized profusely one last time. A black Rolls-Royce Cullinan was waiting for them on the tarmac, a service reserved for heads of state and royalty. As they settled into the silent, opulent interior, Ebony's new personal assistant, hired by Marcus mid-flight, was already on the phone. A new, top-of-the-line laptop was being couriered to their suite at the Savoy. A team of the world's best data recovery specialists had been retained and were on standby in London to receive the soda-drenched husk of her old computer. Every problem was being solved with the swift, overwhelming force of Marcus Thorne's resources. But for Tiffany Miller, the problems were just beginning. Her fall was not a single event. It was a cascade. She flew back to New York in economy class on another airline, a cramped and humbling journey that was a stark reminder of the world she had lost. When she arrived at her condo in Queens, a home she was now in very real danger of losing, she immediately contacted a lawyer. Her case, she felt, was clear: wrongful termination, no due process, no HR hearing. She was a long-serving employee fired on the whim of a vindictive billionaire. The lawyer, a hungry shark named Stan Feynman, saw headlines and a potentially massive settlement. He filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Thorne Aviation Group and Marcus Thorne personally, citing emotional distress and a hostile work environment, ironically claiming she was the victim. The lawsuit was Tiffany's declaration of war. It was also her biggest mistake. Marcus Thorne did not fight wars with half measures. His legal team, a phalanx of the most ruthless corporate lawyers in New York, responded not with a settlement offer, but with a countersuit and a mountain of discovery evidence. The inventory Marcus had demanded from the purser mid-flight had been just the beginning. A full-scale internal audit was launched by a team of independent investigators. They were given unfettered access to everything. What they found was damning. Over her 19-year career, Tiffany Miller had accumulated 12 formal passenger complaints. 8 of them were from passengers of color. They told a familiar story: dismissive attitudes, forgotten requests, subtle but clear patterns of discriminatory service. 3 of these complaints had been resolved by a mid-level HR manager named Gerald Finch, who had simply issued flight vouchers to the complainants and filed the reports away without any disciplinary action against Tiffany. He and Tiffany, it turned out, had been in a long-term, off-the-books relationship. This was the systemic rot Marcus had vowed to find. Gerald Finch was summarily fired. The investigation widened. Chloe, the junior flight attendant, gave a sworn affidavit. She recounted numerous instances of Tiffany making derogatory remarks about passengers of various backgrounds in the privacy of the galley. She described a culture of fear where junior staff were afraid to report a senior attendant's misconduct. Her testimony was corroborated by 2 other flight attendants who came forward, emboldened by the company's new zero-tolerance stance. Then came the final nail in the coffin: David Davies. His deposition was a masterclass in calm, factual annihilation. As a decorated London barrister, his credibility was unimpeachable. He methodically dismantled the accident narrative, painting a clear picture of malice. Tiffany's lawyer, Stan Feynman, saw his easy payday evaporate. He was being buried under thousands of pages of evidence. Marcus Thorne's lawyers filed a motion to have Tiffany's lawsuit dismissed as frivolous. They also filed their own countersuit against Tiffany for defamation and for the cost of the data recovery on Ebony's laptop, which the specialists had miraculously managed to salvage, though at an astronomical price. The judge, reviewing the overwhelming evidence, not only dismissed Tiffany's lawsuit but did so with prejudice, meaning she could never file it again. He chastised her lawyer for bringing such a baseless case to his court. Stan Feynman, facing potential sanctions, dropped Tiffany as a client so fast it created a sonic boom. The karma was relentless. Tiffany was now not only unemployed and blacklisted from the aviation industry, but she was also facing a countersuit from a billionaire with infinite resources. The news of the dismissed lawsuit and the reasons behind it were strategically leaked to the press. The story wasn't billionaire fires flight attendant. It was veteran flight attendant with history of racist complaints fired after assaulting CEO's wife. Her reputation was irrevocably destroyed. She had to sell her condo to pay her mounting legal bills. The countersuit was eventually dropped by Marcus. He had made his point. But she was left financially and professionally ruined. She moved into a small, dingy apartment in a walk-up building. The crisp uniform of a first-class flight attendant was replaced by the cheap polyester of a waitress at a 24-hour diner near LaGuardia, where she served lukewarm coffee to tired travelers. One evening, about a year after the incident, a young black woman sat at one of her tables. The woman was polite, well-dressed, and asked for a glass of Coke. As Tiffany picked up the can, her hand trembled. She saw Ebony's face in her mind's eye. She saw the first-class cabin, the look of shock, the black business card. She saw the life she had thrown away not in a single moment of madness, but through thousands of small, ugly choices that had defined her character. She put the can down, her face pale. "We're out of Coke," she muttered before turning and fleeing to the kitchen, her eyes burning with the bitter, useless tears of regret. The fall was complete. It was long. It was hard. And it was a destination of her own making. For Marcus and Ebony Thorne, the dismissal of Tiffany Miller's lawsuit was not an ending. It was a demarcation point. The battle against one individual was won, but the war against the culture that created her was just beginning. A week after the flight, seated in the vast, art-filled living room of their Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park, they made a decision. This incident will not be a footnote in our lives. It will be a foundation, Marcus said, swirling a glass of wine. Firing her was easy, he continued. Firing the manager who protected her was easy. The hard part is changing the system so that a Tiffany Miller can never climb that high again. The hard part is making sure a Chloe doesn't have to be afraid to speak up. Ebony, who had successfully delivered her keynote in London to rave reviews using her newly recovered presentation, looked at him. Her own ordeal had galvanized her. "Then let's do the hard part," she said. "Let's burn down the old way of doing things and build something better from the ashes." They called it the Draconis Protocol. It was a complete, top-to-bottom overhaul of Aerolux Premier's corporate culture, a project Marcus funded with a passion that went far beyond fiduciary duty. It was personal. First came the training. The standard, box-ticking, 30-minute online diversity seminar was scrapped. In its place, Marcus, with Ebony's guidance, commissioned a new curriculum developed by leading sociologists and psychologists from Harvard and Stanford. It was an intensive, week-long, in-person program for all 5,000 employees, from baggage handlers to the board of directors. It was called the Empathy Engine. It used virtual reality scenarios, role-playing exercises, and frank, facilitated discussions about unconscious bias, privilege, and the history of discrimination. It was uncomfortable, challenging, and non-negotiable. Attendance was mandatory for continued employment. Over 100 employees resigned rather than attend. Marcus considered this a successful filtration process. Next, they tackled the reporting system. The old HR structure was dismantled. Marcus created a new, Independent Office of Corporate Integrity, OCI, which reported directly to him, bypassing all layers of middle management. All complaints were filed through a third party, encrypted system that guaranteed anonymity. Every single complaint was investigated by the OCI within 48 hours. The policy was simple and transparent. One verified instance of discrimination or abuse was grounds for immediate termination. 3 substantiated complaints of lesser, non-discriminatory service failures like rudeness or neglect would trigger a mandatory retraining and a 1-year probationary period. But the protocol wasn't just about punishment. It was about reward. A new system of integrity bonuses was created. Employees who were positively mentioned in passenger surveys for going above and beyond, or who reported issues that led to systemic improvements, received significant financial rewards and public recognition. Chloe, the junior flight attendant who had tried to intervene and later gave her testimony, was given a promotion and became the first recipient of the Draconis Award, an annual prize for courage and integrity. She was made the face of the new Aerolux. The changes were seismic, and they were expensive. The stock price of Thorne Aviation Group took a temporary hit as Wall Street analysts questioned the massive expenditure on soft initiatives. One particularly smug analyst on a cable news show called it woke capitalism and predicted its failure. Marcus Thorne appeared on that same show the next day. He didn't come armed with platitudes. He came with data. "You call it woke capitalism," Marcus said, his voice calm and steady. "I call it risk management. The single biggest financial and reputational risk to any luxury brand is the destruction of its promise. Our promise is perfect service, safety, and respect." Tiffany Miller wasn't just a rogue employee. She was a multi-million-dollar liability walking the aisle. She cost us in legal fees, in data recovery, in the near loss of a high-value client who happens to be my wife, and untold reputational damage that we narrowly contained. "The Draconis Protocol," he continued, "is not an expense. It is an investment. It is an insurance policy against the rot of complacency. We are building a corporate culture that is not only morally sound but economically indestructible. Our clients don't just pay for a seat. They pay for an experience they can trust. And our employees are not just staff. They are ambassadors of that trust. We will be the most trusted airline in the world. Now tell me, what's the long-term stock value of that?" His argument was so compelling, so rooted in a fusion of ethics and ruthless business logic, that it silenced the critics. And he was right. Within 18 months, Aerolux Premier's customer satisfaction scores soared to become the highest in the industry. They attracted a new, fiercely loyal clientele. Applications for employment flooded in from the best and brightest in the industry, all wanting to be part of the revolution. The stock price not only recovered but climbed to unprecedented heights. The Draconis Protocol became a Harvard Business School case study on how to turn a corporate crisis into a triumph. Ebony and Marcus never flew on a commercial flight again, preferring their own private jet, but their impact remained. The story of Flight 104 became a legend in the industry, a cautionary tale for some, an inspiration for others. The true, hard karma wasn't just that Tiffany Miller lost her job and her comfortable life. It was that her single, ugly act of prejudice, born from a desire to make one black woman feel small, became the very catalyst that empowered thousands. It created a system that championed respect and dismantled the silent bigotry she had relied on. Her legacy was not the stain she left on a silk blouse, but the indelible mark of progress she unintentionally forced upon an entire industry. She tried to be an anchor of hate, and in the end, her failure gave the world wings. 2 years passed. The Draconis Protocol was no longer a radical experiment, but a celebrated success story. Aerolux Premier was the undisputed king of luxury air travel. Its reputation for impeccable service and integrity is solid as the gold bullion in Fort Knox. For Marcus and Ebony Thorne, life was a harmonious blend of business triumphs and shared passions. They believed the ghosts of Flight 104 had been well and truly laid to rest. But they had forgotten about the serpents they had cast out of their garden. Gerald Finch was one such serpent. The disgraced HR manager, Tiffany Miller's former protector and lover, had not landed softly. Fired for gross negligence and collusion, he was unemployable in any corporate capacity. His name was radioactive. He now lived in a cramped apartment in Bayonne, New Jersey, his days fueled by cheap whiskey and a festering, all-consuming resentment. He had lost his six-figure salary, his expense account, his power. He blamed Marcus Thorne for all of it. In his mind, he and Tiffany were the victims of a billionaire's tyrannical overreach. His obsession led him to an online forum for disgruntled ex-employees of major corporations. It was a hive of conspiracy theories and impotent rage. It was there he connected with a man named Lawrence Beal. Lawrence Beal was the smug financial analyst Marcus had publicly eviscerated on live television. The humiliation had shattered Beal's career. His predictions of Aerolux's failure had made him a laughingstock, and he was soon let go from the network. Now he ran a fringe financial blog called The Contrarian, where he railed against what he called performative corporate justice. Gerald and Lawrence were two sides of the same bitter coin. Gerald had the insider knowledge of the old, corrupt system, and Lawrence had the platform, however small, to weaponize it. They met in a dingy bar in the financial district, two men united by a shared enemy. "He didn't just fire me," Gerald slurred, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "He erased me. But I know things. Before Thorne, Aerolux was run by good old boys. We handled things quietly. We had a discretionary fund for passenger inconveniences, things that needed to disappear." Lawrence Beal leaned in, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "What kind of things?" "An engine flame out on a flight out of Dubai in 2017, covered up as a precautionary landing. A food poisoning outbreak from the catering service in Hong Kong, settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements. Thorne's acquisition team must have seen the payouts during due diligence. If he knew about these safety issues and didn't make them public when he took over, we can frame the Draconis Protocol as the biggest cover-up of all time." The plan was diabolical. They wouldn't accuse Thorne of creating the problems, but of hiding them. They would paint his grand ethical overhaul as a cynical PR stunt designed to bury the airline's dirty laundry under a mountain of good press. They would argue he only acted when his own wife was a victim, implying he was happy to let others suffer as long as the problems remained quiet. Lawrence spent a month crafting the narrative on his blog. He wove Gerald's half-truths and twisted facts into a sprawling conspiracy theory. He found two passengers from the Dubai flight who were willing to talk, their original NDAs having been with the pre-Thorne Aerolux, a legal gray area Lawrence was eager to exploit. The article, titled The Draconis Deception, How Marcus Thorne Buried Aerolux's Sins to Build a Woke Empire, went live on a Tuesday morning. It was a masterpiece of insinuation and bad faith arguments. It didn't have the reach of a major newspaper, but it was designed for the modern media ecosystem, red meat for the outrage machine. Within hours, key phrases were trending on social media, amplified by bots and accounts hostile to Marcus Thorne's high-profile success. The news reached Marcus in his office on the 80th floor of Thorne Tower. His head of communications, a sharp woman named Alani, stood grimly before his desk, a tablet displaying the hateful article. Marcus read it, his expression hardening with each paragraph. His first instinct was primal. "Get the legal team," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I want this blog sued into oblivion. I want Lawrence Beal and Gerald Finch destitute. I want to scorch the earth where they stand." "We can do that," Alani said calmly. "And we will win. But in the court of public opinion, a lawsuit like that looks like a billionaire silencing his critics. It gives their narrative oxygen. It makes them martyrs." Just then, Ebony walked in. She had been in a meeting with the curators of a new gallery funded by their foundation. She took one look at her husband's face and the tablet in Alani's hand and knew something was wrong. She read the article, her expression unreadable. "They're not attacking the protocol," she said finally, her insight cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "They're attacking your integrity. They're trying to poison the why. If people believe you did all this for selfish reasons, then the entire message is lost." She looked at Marcus. "Scorching the earth is your move, I know. But this isn't a boardroom battle. This is a story. And you can't defeat a story with lawyers. You have to tell a better one." Marcus looked from his wife to his communications chief. He saw the same wisdom reflected in both their eyes. His rage was a powerful tool, but it wasn't always the right one. This attack was insidious, a cloud of poison gas, not a frontal assault. All right, he said, the fury in his eyes being replaced by a cold, calculating focus. What's the better story? The truth, Ebony said simply, but not told in a press release. We need to go back to where it all started. We need to talk to the people who were wronged before I ever was. We don't just deny their story. We show the world the real one. A plan began to form. It was bold, risky, and entirely public. It wouldn't be fought in a courtroom, but in the open. They would find the people from the Dubai flight, the victims of the food poisoning, every person who was failed by the old Aerolux. They wouldn't hide the airline's past sins, they would expose them, and in doing so, expose Gerald Finch and Lawrence Beale as manipulators exploiting victims for their own petty revenge. Marcus picked up his phone, but he didn't call his lawyers. He called the head of the Office of Corporate Integrity. I need a list, he said, his voice now calm and decisive. Every major incident and settlement from the 5 years before our acquisition. I want to find every single person the old Aerolux paid for their silence. We're not just going to tell a better story. We're going to let them tell it for us. The Serpent's Gambit had failed to account for one thing: Marcus Thorne had not buried the past. He had learned from it, and now he was going to use it as a weapon. The days that followed were a blur of controlled, strategic action. Marcus Thorne's OCI, the Office of Corporate Integrity, moved with the speed and precision of a special forces unit. They unearthed the digital ghosts of the old Aerolux, compiling a grim and secret history of corporate malfeasance. Every hushed-up safety scare, every quietly settled complaint, every non-disclosure agreement was catalogued. It was the very ammunition Gerald and Lawrence thought they owned, but it was about to be turned against them with breathtaking force. Instead of deploying lawyers, Marcus and Ebony launched a different kind of offensive, one rooted in empathy. They assembled a victim advocacy team composed of trauma counselors, social workers, and compassionate legal advisors. This team began the delicate process of reaching out to the people on the OCI's list. The first call was to the Sharma family in London, who had been on the Dubai flight in 2017. They had been flying with their 2 young children when the engine flamed out. The terror of that experience was compounded by the dismissive way the old Aerolux management had handled it, pressuring them into signing an NDA in exchange for a settlement that felt more like hush money than compensation. The advocate who called them didn't mention Lawrence Beale's blog. She simply said, "My name is Sarah, and I work for the new leadership at Aerolux. We have reviewed the file on Flight 921. We know what happened to you was not a precautionary landing. We know it was terrifying, and we know you were silenced. We are calling today to unconditionally void that NDA and to offer a formal public apology. And if you are willing, we want to give you a platform to tell your story in your own words." Mr. Sharma was silent for a long moment, stunned. Then, his voice thick with emotion, he said, "For 6 years, we felt like our fear didn't matter. Yes, we'll talk." It was a pattern repeated with dozens of others, the victims of the Hong Kong food poisoning outbreak, the passenger whose priceless cello was destroyed by baggage handlers and then covered up. Each was approached with respect, not pressure. Almost all of them agreed to speak. Their desire to have their truth acknowledged was far more powerful than the money they had been paid to forget it. While this quiet outreach was happening, Marcus and Alani, his head of communications, planned their masterstroke. They announced Aerolux, The Reckoning, a live, globally streamed event. It was billed not as a press conference, but as a public town hall. Marcus and Ebony would be present, but the stage would belong to the victims of the airline's past. Lawrence Beale and Gerald Finch watched the announcement with growing panic. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were meant to be the champions of the forgotten. Now Marcus Thorne was hijacking their narrative, positioning himself as a healer rather than a conspirator. Lawrence's blog, The Contrarian, tried to spin the event as a cynical PR stunt, a show trial to re-traumatize victims, but the poison wasn't working. The victims themselves were now posting on social media, expressing their gratitude for finally having a voice. The night of the reckoning, the atmosphere in the broadcast studio was electric. The set was stark and intimate, no fancy graphics, no corporate banners, just a semicircle of chairs on a simple stage. Marcus and Ebony Thorne walked out first. Marcus stepped up to a single microphone. Good evening, he began, his voice devoid of its usual corporate confidence, replaced by a somber humility. Tonight is not about the future of Aerolux. It is about its past. When my wife and I acquired this airline, we knew we were buying assets and routes. We did not fully appreciate that we were also inheriting a legacy of broken trust and a history of silenced voices. My wife's experience on Flight 104 was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a deep cultural sickness. Tonight, we are here to listen, to learn, and to apologize. The stage is not ours. It belongs to them. He and Ebony then took seats at the side of the stage, becoming part of the audience. One by one, the victims came forward. The Sharmas, their faces etched with the memory of fear, recounted the engine fire, the cabin filling with smoke, and the subsequent cold, clinical process of being silenced. A distinguished elderly man described how the Hong Kong food poisoning had caused him to miss his own daughter's wedding, a regret the old airline had valued at a mere $10,000. Their stories were raw, powerful, and undeniably true. They painted a damning picture of a corporate culture that Gerald Finch had personally curated and protected. The final speaker was Chloe, the flight attendant who had been promoted for her integrity. She spoke with a quiet, steady voice about the fear that permeated the old crew culture. "We were taught that the passenger was always right," she said. But the unspoken rule was that management was always righter. Reporting a senior colleague, especially one protected by HR, wasn't just discouraged. It was professional suicide. The Draconis Protocol didn't just give us new rules. It gave us a conscience. It gave us permission to do the right thing. Her testimony was the final, devastating blow. It proved that the rot wasn't just about isolated safety failures. It was systemic. It was a culture of fear. And its chief architect was the man now trying to rewrite history from the shadows. The town hall was a global phenomenon. The hashtag Aerolux reckoning trended at #1 worldwide. The narrative had been flipped with surgical precision. Marcus Thorne was no longer the villain. He was the reformer. Lawrence Beale's blog was inundated with furious comments from people who felt used and manipulated. His credibility evaporated overnight, and his blog faded into irrelevance. In his dingy Bayonne apartment, Gerald Finch watched it all, the whiskey bottle empty beside him. He had been so close. He had crafted the perfect weapon. But he had underestimated his enemy's strategy. Marcus Thorne hadn't just dodged the bullet. He had caught it, melted it down, and forged it into a crown. The true, hard karma had finally found its mark. It wasn't bankruptcy or a lawsuit. It was absolute, crushing irrelevance. In their desperate attempt to destroy Marcus Thorne's legacy, Gerald Finch and Lawrence Beale had only succeeded in cementing it, making him the hero of the very story they had engineered him to be the villain of. They were forgotten, two bitter ghosts haunting the edges of a redemption story they had accidentally helped write. So, in the end, what is the lesson from Flight 104? It's that karma isn't always a lightning bolt from a clear blue sky. Sometimes it's a quiet reckoning. It's the slow, methodical dismantling of a hateful system. Tiffany Miller's real punishment wasn't just losing her job. It was becoming completely irrelevant. Her act of hate, meant to diminish Ebony Wilson, instead became the fertile ground from which a new, better standard grew, a standard of accountability and respect she could never be a part of. Marcus and Ebony Thorne didn't just seek revenge. They sought a revolution. They used their immense power not just to punish one person, but to protect and uplift thousands. This story is a powerful reminder that our actions, no matter how small they seem, have ripples. And that true strength isn't about putting someone down. It's about having the power to lift everyone else up. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to Dark Stories for more tales of justice and incredible, real-life karma. Let us know in the comments what you think about the Draconis Protocol. We'll see you in the next one.